this model needed to stand alone. And it was my partners at that firm who was like, what you're doing here is great, but it doesn't really fit inside another firm.
What
It's
we're doing,
completely
right.
different. You gotta kind of try that on your own. So with their full support and blessing, I launched Link to see if there was something there. And 8.5 years later, I can tell a great story about how that was all a really strategic progression, but it's not. It's just really good storytelling. Each step kind of on their own made sense, and together they've made a lot of sense.
From his roots in Sackett Harbor as Sonny the Clown, Michael Akin has literally spent his life bringing joy and equality to everyone he comes in contact with. His laser focus on community is apparent in everything that he does, and it's no laughing matter. In fact, it's astoundingly impressive. From Vice President of Government, International, and Community Relations at the George Washington University to the GW Award, Michael has always set out to help others. In 2011, the Greater Washington Urban League recognized Mr. Akin with the Chairman's Award, and the D.C. City Council adopted a formal resolution to acknowledge his contributions. In 2015, Michael receives the prestigious Laura Lisner Award for his work and advocacy on behalf of DC's senior citizens. Not to mention, he was also named Young Entrepreneur of the Year by the DC Chamber of Commerce. In 2018, he was named one of Washington Business Journal's 40 Under 40, and in 2019, Link Strategic Partners is officially on the Inc. 5000 board as one of the fastest growing, most successful businesses in the United States. Michael is known for his seemingly endless energy, compassion for community, and relentless drive to help others. You gotta love anybody who has a happy guy as the first line of his Twitter handle. From the podium to paternity leave, Michael is equally focused on his family and what that means to him and other families in his community and beyond. In fact, when asked about Michael, Robert J. Terry said, Michael has grown his marketing and communications firm from a 5-employee shop to a company with 30 employees and 7 offices across the U.S., but it's his work across all 8 D.C. wards that resonates, including a campaign that attracted a record number of foster parent applications in the district. You can find all this information and the best 40 Under 40 interview on the map, but today we're going to talk about where all this came from and who lit that fire. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Michael Akin.
Wow.
I know, right?
You did your research.
Can you believe you did all that?
Sonny the Clown. Like, you went back.
Oh, man.
I love that.
I had the best time researching you. I was like, this is so good. 80 is the new 40. Like, you have so many gems, man.
I'm going to try and live up to it. Next time I get introduced on a panel, I'm going to not submit a written bio.
Yeah, just have me
I'm
show
just
up.
going to have them like play that on a loop.
Yeah, or I can just show up and
I'd
be
love
like,
it.
ladies and gentlemen.
Bring my own hype person. I love that.
I'm here for it. I mean, all jokes aside, like, I am wholly impressed with just, first of all, do you sleep?
A little bit.
How did you
is
find
important.
time to have a family? I have so many
Yeah.
logistical questions. Like, I'm just really amazed. Like, I love the Sonny the Clown. I was like, I can't believe he admitted to
Right.
that in writing, but
Yeah.
this is amazing.
And I made the outfit that I wore as Sonny the Clown in 4-H. I learned how to sew it, and I wore it. And it was like, and I made balloon animals for the kids.
That's
Yeah,
amazing.
it's like a whole thing.
I mean, I think there's something to be said for like kind of finding your personality when
Right.
you're able to put on a costume,
Right.
Especially at a younger age, because you get to just like, drop back into that.
Yeah.
No one really knows who you are, so you have the freedom to just be extra crazy. And I think it's a good personality development tool,
I
right?
used to wear the clown outfit. Now it's a 3-piece suit, but the,
I
the
mean,
impact is the same.
Little column A, little column B, right? But no, I'm just so curious about you. This is just a, lifelong devotion to service. From the babies to the old babies, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just so impressive. Like, I literally was getting goosebumps and like almost tearing up a little bit. And then I laughed a couple times, like reading some of your interviews and stuff. Cause, you just have a great sense of humor. And so I just want to learn more about you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, where did that come from? Like, is it somebody in your family? Was it your upbringing? Like, what is that?
I think it's a variety of things. I am unabashedly a mama's boy, and my mom has had a massive influence in my life. Both my parents did. I've got a good family, but my mom is the one who I think I got a lot of this spark from, and a lot of what I am today I see from her work ethic and the drive. So my parents divorced when I was pretty young, and my mom really raised my sister and I during our formative years. So my dad was there when we were growing up. I have good memories of the stuff he instilled in me as well. But during those years when you're kind of a teenager and growing, it was really my mom, and she was a housekeeper and cleaned restaurants and hotels, and that's how she made a living when we were growing up. So we'd go and do that with her. And I remember when she got a job as a high school janitor, that's when kind of everything came together for our family, because suddenly that job allowed us to have medical coverage and benefits, et cetera. And it showed that, work of any level has so much merit and meaning, but it also
Right.
provides stability for families. So I think the work ethic comes directly from watching that. And even in like the hardest moments when we don't know where the paycheck's coming from, my mom is still like this happy, bubbly person. And I think that's likely where I got some of it from.
I mean, it definitely, I'm not on your team, and so I'm sure there's times when things are tense and tough. I mean, you're juggling so many balls. There's no way that some of,
Yeah.
the only way you can have so many wins is if you have some fails in the mix, right? And
100%.
and that's just par for the course.
Right.
And so I'm sure there's days where you're not as bubbly, but from the outside looking in, I mean, you just seem to have endless amounts of energy, and you're impacting so many people. And I mean, I didn't even list like your client list and who
Right.
you're currently working with. These are just like the major accolades, And so, how did you know, coming from, upstate New York, how did you know like what you wanted to study when you came to DC, or
Right.
how did that transition happen?
I think it's been a constant journey and a constant work in progress, and I have to be really careful that it doesn't sound like I'm speaking in poster phrases, but I have found that it takes just as much energy to have a good day as a bad day. Right? Like think about the amount of energy we invest in having a bad day. When we're having a
Totally.
bad day, we invest a lot of energy in having a bad day and making sure everyone else
Yeah.
does. So it's going to be just as hard to have good days consistently. So why don't we just invest our energy there? I find the return is greater. So that's how I try and keep myself up, even in those bad days. Like let's just make a decision to try and bring other people up. I came from Sackett's Harbor. It's a town of about 1,200 people in upstate New York on Lake Ontario. Beautiful little town.
I
And
bet.
my school, K through 12, had 500 kids in it. Just went back for my 20-year high school reunion for my graduating class of 42 kids.
Right.
It's a little tiny town. I came to GW to do politics, whatever that means. Right? I had this idea that I wanted to do politics. And then I got here and went to get my first internship in politics, and I got it. And I said, "How much does this pay?" And they said that. They laughed. They're like,
Right.
"What, kid? No, that's not how this works. You're an intern. Your payment is the experience." And I'm thinking, awesome. That doesn't buy me books or food or let me stay in school. And so I went and became a caterer for Design Cuisine. I was taking 8 a.m. classes so I could cater until 1 or 2 in the morning. And I'm so glad I had that experience, because it showed me a part of Washington I had no business being in as this punk kid who just got here. But we're catering black tie gala. Got my first tux, right, for $99, and I'm catering. And it was a great way of learning both DC and the side of DC that once you achieve status to be in those rooms, you're seeing it from that perspective. I got to see it from the other perspective, like putting on the events, the service. And it was such I think, a great introduction to a part of the city that I'm really glad I saw.
Yeah, for sure, because it's such an interesting combination of
Right.
like hospitality and service, and just understanding how those rooms work.
Right.
It's interesting. I worked for the Washington Business Journal, and
Yep.
so it was like talking to top execs, CEOs.
Right.
Really early on when I was really young, I was working in the circulation sales
Yep.
department. And so I would be calling, guys like you and saying, "Hey, your subscription's about to expire. You want to renew it?" And they'd be like, you had to be audible and quick. They'd answer the phone and say, "You have 10 seconds.
Right.
Make it count." You're like, "Oh fuck," you know
Okay,
what I mean?
like,
Like,
it's
all right,
eight seconds,
I
right?
can't hear you. Speak up. Oh, like they scared the hell out of me, but they
Right.
really like sharpened my sword
Right.
and got me ready for that world. But it was interesting to just sort of be behind the scenes of a
Right.
business publication like that and just kind of see what
How
was
all of that works.
Yeah, exactly, and how it all works. It definitely kind of paved the way for some of the stuff I'm doing now.
Fantastic. And so I did that for 2 years and loved it. It was a great job. But I still wasn't doing, again, politics, whatever that meant. So
Right.
I got a job with a program called the Neighbors Project Corps at the George Washington University. And it was a service job where you spent 700 or 800 hours a year going out doing direct service in the community, and then also being a liaison to get other students involved in service. So I became a community organizer in the Shaw neighborhood for low-income seniors and vulnerable seniors to try and keep them in their homes as long as possible. That introduced me to another part of DC I didn't even know existed, right? It's so easy to go to a city, get all immersed in the bubble of where you're living and think that you know everything because here, I lived in Foggy Bottom. Yeah, great. That was awesome.
Right.
And there's a whole city you need to learn outside of that. And it was my time with Emmaus that taught me about what I would call the real DC, the DC that people live in, not the DC that people kind of travel through. And I
Right.
fell in love with it. And so my perspective started to change there. And I still wasn't doing politics, but I was doing kind of direct grassroots outreach, and it was super meaningful.
What year was that?
This was, when was this? This was like 2000-ish,
So
99, 2000.
yeah. Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah, and you were starting to see some of the changes in neighborhoods. You were starting to see some of the gentrification patterns around Shaw, but really still on the cusp of some of that. And it gave me a really direct insight into some of the benefits of transitioning neighborhoods and some of the really bad downsides to transitioning neighborhoods, and an objectivity about looking at that. And after I did that for about a year and a half and adored it. I sat down with this guy at GW. His name's Bernard Demchuk. He's a mentor of mine to this day, and he was their assistant vice president for DC affairs. He was the university's kind of lobbyist to the city. It was his job to represent GW to Washington, DC. And I sat with him, and he's like, you're looking in all the wrong places. Don't work up on the Hill. Work in local government. Let me make some introductions. And I said, what do you do? He said, I do government relations. I said, I don't know what that is. Do you need an intern? And he ended up hiring me that summer, and I stayed with him for the next 9 years. So I was his intern, then his assistant, then I got hired full-time when I graduated, and then moved all the way up to leaving that office as a vice president. And when I left, the guy who had hired me as his intern was reporting to me. And I say that because it was such a lesson in leadership. I remember the meeting where he had earned the role. Our senior vice president had left. It should have been his. I would have supported him 100%. And in the meeting, he's like, why are you not giving this to Michael? He's earned it. He's doing all of it. I just want to do DC. You need someone to do international, Virginia, federal, and local. He does all of that. If he's earned it, give him the damn job. And I remember that. And
That's
it was
amazing.
It's amazing. It's like you can't get a better mentor than that. And so I assumed that role, and it was a huge learning moment, but in the best possible way. So did that until I left to go to a consulting company where I was trying to put together this idea of what a community engagement firm would look like, because I thought there was something there, but no one had done it before. So we wanted to try and figure out this model. So I was recruited into a consulting firm to build it in-house, had a phenomenal year at that firm, but really realized this model needed to stand alone. And it was my partners at that firm who was like, what you're doing here is great, but it doesn't really fit inside another firm. It's completely different. You gotta kind of try that on your own. So with their full support and blessing, I launched Link to see if there was something there. And 8.5 years later, I can tell a great story about how that was all a really strategic progression, but it's not. It's just really good storytelling. Each step kind of on their own made sense, and together they've made a lot of sense.
Well, it sounds like it was a really solid foundation
Absolutely.
for this house that you've built, in the best possible way.
Yeah.
I mean, that, gives me even more respect for the work you're doing, and for you just knowing that you've been in the communities and been working with elders of DC in 2000. That really means a lot.
Right.
And I think that's probably why I really like you, right? Like, it's just because DC is it's changing so quickly, and you don't know what side of the road to be on. And some of the changes are good and some of them are bad. Like, you can't just blanket all of them. And it is so hard. And I think it boils down to like local government and getting involved and actually caring about people. Like, if we just care about people, then the rest of it is just paperwork, right? And the details. And it's obviously not quite that simple, but at the core of it just boils down to compassion.
It's compassion, and it's a willingness to have messy discussions without figuring out what the solution is at the front end, right? So we do a lot of this community facilitation work. It's a core belief of mine that if I ask you your position on an issue and you ask me mine at the start of a discussion, we now spend the rest of our time trying to convince each other of our position. It leaves no room for dialogue.
Right.
So take the most controversial issue you can think of. I think those are the discussions where we need to start with storytelling and understanding and commonalities to try and move people to the middle where much change happens. Now, that's not to take anything away from sometimes you need people at the extremes pulling in the right direction. But a lot of the progress happens when you get people to move there together. And that doesn't happen when we blame each other. And so I think a lot of that experience has kind of led me to that.
Well, it's my whole deal with podcasting is that I believe that listening is the revolution.
Right.
That's my idea worth spreading, if you will, because it boils down to that, right? Like, if we can just actually listen to each other and gain some perspective, it makes it so much harder to hate that other person or vilify that other person or whatever, right? And there's just been so much of that going on in this last election cycle. And so now more than ever, we need all of that. I mean, I'm just so impressed with the, all of the work that you're doing. And so like with Link, like what are some of the, projects that you're working on that you're the most proud of, because it's a little confusing to even people are like, I told some, business partners and stuff about you a couple months ago. I was like, yeah, he owns Link. And they're like, what do they do? And I'm like, everything. I think, I don't know. Like they're doing so much good stuff. I don't even know how to like paraphrase, So
we talk about ourselves as a social impact firm. So we're a strategic communications and stakeholder engagement consulting firm. All of the work we do has to have a positive social impact and positive community engagement. Within that, lots of stuff can fit in there. So if you look at the traditional business model, part of what we do is strategic communications. So website, social media, media relations, digital, design, photography, everything that makes up a communications firm. We do all that in-house. What makes us different is we have this stakeholder and community engagement focus as well. Sometimes that's small community level dialogues. Sometimes it's focus groups. Sometimes it's big citywide 1,000-person community meetings that we're trying to put on. So it's everywhere in between, but it's looking at engagement as a process and not necessarily an end, right? So when I was starting Link, there were groups and firms that talked about grassroots engagement, but they were often doing that from the standpoint of a lobbying or political effort, right? Here's an issue I care about. I'm going to hire a firm to go find 1,000 letters of support for that issue. Nothing wrong with that, but that's not really engagement. That's a political campaign. It's much harder to say, I don't know what the ballot initiative should be, but I want to do a whole bunch of community engagement to figure that out. And that's when you bring in Link and we do that type of stuff. So you mentioned the foster care work earlier. That's one of the campaigns I'll always be proudest of. DC was sending about 1,000 kids a year outside of the city for placement. We didn't have enough foster homes. We still don't have enough foster homes, and we're doing a new campaign with them right now. We don't have enough foster homes in DC to care for all our foster kids. And the quick version of this is, if you think about what fostering is at its core, it's a temporary placement until a family can be stabilized enough to reintroduce the child back into the situation. That doesn't always work, and often it leads to adoption or other placements. But in general, fostering is supposed to remove a child, help address the situation until it's safe enough for that child to return. If you're pulling that kid out of their family life, their community life, their faith life, and sending them to another state, you're making it much harder for any sort of successful reunification to happen, and you're kind of giving that kid one more thing they have to overcome. So we did a lot of work. We did a ward by ward analysis, a neighborhood by neighborhood look of who's moving in and out of the city, who's fostering, who's not, and why. And it became this really fascinating campaign about really addressing stereotypes head on, making sure that marketing and communication tells a story. So if you look at how foster and adoption is talked about most places around the country, it's a really cute picture of a really adorable baby, and the message is, do this to save this kid. Why do we do that? We do it because it works. Like, that's a heartstrings approach. But in DC, the kids we didn't have placements for were teen males, teen moms, and sibling groups. So if you run this whole campaign about, don't you want to save this baby, and then a teenager shows up at your door at 2:00 in the morning, there's been a disconnect between what we've told you is going to happen and what does. So the whole campaign became about, let's just tell an authentic story of what we're trying to solve for, and let's lean into some of those stereotypes that people have. So for example, and some of these numbers are a little outdated because the campaign was about 3 or 4 years ago and we're updating them. But if you look at Ward 7, for example, at the time it was somewhere around 20%, maybe 22% of the foster kids in foster care were coming out of Ward 7. Now, if you think about the mental models that a lot of people have about where foster kids would be coming from in the city, that probably aligns with what people expect. Like, okay, that makes sense, 20% or so. So then we asked, well, where are the foster homes in the city? And at that time, it was something like 35% of all the foster homes in DC were in that city. That's an asset story, not a deficit story. That is a ward that is not only taking care of its own, it's taking care of a bunch of other kids around the city that don't have foster placements either. So we need to lean into the asset stories and talk about why, Ward 7 was doing a phenomenal job caring for their kids and other people's kids. And then you have Ward 3 with the biggest houses, most available bedrooms at the time. Like, I think it was fostering less than 1% of the kids. That's not a judgment. It's facts that we can then build a campaign around based on assets instead of deficits. So those are the types of campaigns we like to take on. Or they're not straight up marketing campaigns. They're like social movements that also have a marketing component and a community engagement component. Does that make sense?
Totally. And I love it because Ward 7 and Ward 8 just needs love, man. And they need more recognition, and they need more grocery stores. They just, they need more. I mean, that's such a beautiful stat. And and like unfair at the same time, right? Like the wards that are getting the least amount of support are providing the most amount of support.
And
you
in the
know?
community engagement space that I operate in every city, but if you look at Washington, D.C., it's on the people doing the engagement to do their homework and ask community members things that are additive and not extractive, right? So I run a community engagement firm, and I'm often telling clients, why do we need to do another community meeting here? Is it because you need to say you did a community meeting in this part of the city? Or is it because you really don't know what the issues are? Or because you need a better understanding? This idea that we're just going to hold a community meeting on a Wednesday night in a school gymnasium, and it's on everyone that has to come to our meeting. Like, why are we asking them to give up their time? What value is added to that? And is there an easier way to do it? Can we have them live stream into the meeting if they can't get daycare? If they are coming to the meeting, can we have actually done our homework to figure out what they told us the last 30 times we called them together? Or else you're just perpetuating this cycle of, you only want me here to say you did a meeting, not because you're listening to me at all.
Right, you're checking
So we spend
boxes.
a lot of time being like, okay, tell me why you want to do the meeting. And if you tell me I need to do the meeting because it's really important politically that I do a meeting here, okay, at least we've acknowledged it. Now, how do we add value in the room to the people who are giving up time to come out, right? It's a two-way street instead of being an extractive process.
I mean, that's really impressive. So how, when you're working on a project like this, is this something that the government hires you for? Is this like privately funded? Like, how do you even go about like having such a wholehearted mission like that, and then getting the funding for it?
Right. So when we started the company, the challenge was that no one knew how to buy these services. And I think that's why these firms didn't exist previously. So the idea was to put together a community engagement firm. No one knew how to buy that. So there were a couple issues. Governments didn't have commodity codes to buy community engagement. The private sector still saw it as very touchy-feely. The nonprofit sector loved it and had no money for it, right? So I have an MBA. That's a pretty bad market to enter into, right? No one knows how to buy or pay for your services. Great, let's start a company. So that's where the communications focus came from. People understood communications. They knew how to buy it. So we said, let's do communications and community engagement, because those two together we thought were fundable. So we kind of took that to market. Why do firms come out of the blue when they didn't exist? It's either because no one has figured out the business model yet, or it's a really bad business model. Luckily, we'd figured out, people hadn't figured it out yet. But even in that first year, we probably gave away nearly half of all of our time and services on a completely pro bono basis.
Just to show people that it works.
We had to prove a market, right? And I mentioned I have an MBA. Most of my business professors would be like, that's not a good business model if half of your revenue is being given away. But we showed that this worked and that we were good at it. We created a model, and then we figured out how to scale that model. And it was when we got really comfortable with the approach and the theory, and we had some successes to show, that we were able to start building this in a really genuine way. So today we have private sector, we have public sector, we have government, we have local, we have everyone in between, and we found a way to do a huge amount of pro bono work. We probably do easily 30-35% a year of pro bono and low bono work. And we have, $1 million clients. So we've put together a firm that allows us to do all of that. And I think that's been really, really intentional. We don't want to be so big from an overhead standpoint that we can't take on the work we really want to do.
Totally.
And we don't want to be so small from a staff standpoint that we can't take on the big, impactful projects we want to. So I feel like we're in that niche, and we're constantly trying to stay there.
I mean, that's a great balance. I adopted the 70-30 rule this year myself because I have a tendency to give away all of my services, and then I'm like, I can't pay the rent. And so I decided this year 70-30. I can't remember who told me that. And it's like 70% of my business is paid and funded, and then that way the 30% I can do the stuff I want to do, and I can build, do it for the culture.
Exactly
I can do it for my community, and I can do it for free because like I'm secure, and the staff is getting paid, and then that allows me to like do the stuff that I really want to do from my heart.
And that's sustainable, right?
It's sustainable.
So we are unabashedly a for-profit business, and we get a lot of questions of, why didn't you just organize as a nonprofit? I don't think that's sustainable.
That's an obvious
We've set up this dichotomy that to do good, you have to be willing to make no money and work in a nonprofit, and that's unfair to people who work in nonprofits. And to make money, you have to sell out everything you believe in and focus on that. Neither of those are sustainable paths.
Totally.
So if we can do business and make money and do good, that is much scalable on a large scale. In my opinion, we have to find a way to allow business to do good and incentivize it. And that's not a philosophical belief. Like, we've actually put together a model that allowed us to be an Inc. 5000 company. We've been profitable for 8 straight years. And we've not sacrificed, in my opinion, any of the missions that led us there. And we still do far more community engagement than firms literally 10 times as large as we are. So we found a way to just bake that into the mission.
Which is so smart because, nonprofits are great, but they're difficult and they're limiting and they're a lot of work and they can be really expensive. And to have to ask for money every year after year after year, it's such a simple, obvious statement, but it can't be successful if it's not sustainable.
That's exactly
like,
right.
Period. It doesn't matter how good it is, it just won't work if it can't live on its own.
I completely agree. And when we talk about pro bono and kind of giving away our time, I think it's really important for business owners to be able to quantify that as well. So I don't see us doing work for a nonprofit as a wasted revenue opportunity. I see it as a marketing opportunity that I didn't have to pay for, right? So if we get approached by a nonprofit, which we do all the time, and they say, we really need you, but we really don't have a budget. I'm like, great. Do you do a fundraising gala? Awesome. Can we be recognized as a presenting sponsor of your fundraising gala? Give us a table at the event, and in return, we'll do all of this work pro bono.
Smart.
Right?
You're going to go meet 1 million people because of who you are.
Exactly.
That suit alone is going to bring them
Exactly.
in,
But then in the room, everyone's like, wow, Link, if they're presenting this, they must be a big deal. So it perpetuates it in the best possible and most authentic way because everyone's getting what they need out of it.
I mean, I love it. I love that you've not tricked the system, but using the marketing and the communications to get things done in such a beautiful way. It's really brilliant. And so I'm curious, how were you able to scale that outside of DC, because so much of, and I guess maybe some of it is kind of duplicatable. I don't think that's a real word, but whatever. In other cities, but you have so much knowledge to the neighborhoods and the people and the culture here, and that guided a lot of what you've done. Do you find that it's similar in other cities? Is that how you were able to move, or is it all? I guess community engagement it's everywhere, right?
We struggled with this a long time philosophically to figure out if we're this community engagement firm that's respecting the communities where we operate, how do we do that if we don't have a fundamental understanding of the places we're going? And so when we started, we were very DC focused, then DMV, and then we started getting invited into other cities by school systems and others saying, we have this problem, you seem to have solved it there, can you help us? And so we took a really honest approach to that. I remember interviewing with a school board in Texas where they asked me, what do you know about this town? And I said, honestly, the 750 pages I read on the plane. So in many ways, I probably have more current stats than you do. But beyond that, that's where my knowledge of your town ends. What I do know is community engagement and what works, and I have a theory and a practice and past performance that backs this up. But it's got to be a partnership. You bring the local knowledge, we'll bring a way to do this, and if that works, we can be great partners. If it doesn't, I fully understand that, and let us help you find some local firms. Early on, we probably lost some work by approaching it that way, and that's great. That's probably work we should have lost. But by being that honest and transparent, we weren't representing who we weren't, and it led to a really phenomenal partnership. So as we had more and more of those wins, we were very comfortable in the model now of saying, you are the local experts, we are the engagement experts, let's work together. Now we're on the ground, we invest very deeply in the communities we work in, but we still don't try and represent that we know more than we do. And I think that authenticity helps us be a little bit more true to us.
Well, and it's just so important because you see it in all these cities. You see it in Detroit a lot. Shinola shows up and they're bringing Detroit back, and then people who are from Detroit are like, "What are you talking about?" You know what I mean? You're an Illinois-based company. This doesn't even make any sense, right? And so then that just creates immediate friction. So it doesn't matter how good Shinola is or what they're doing. They lost the community right there because it's, how do you claim to know, it just can't work that way. You got to partner with people on the ground.
You got to partner. You got to be a little humble. You got to know what you can do and what you can't do. We also believe very strongly that there has to be an intentionality behind making sure our firm reflects the communities we operate in, right? That doesn't mean as a nationwide firm, we can hire huge amounts of people in every market we work in, but it does mean our team has to reflect the type of work we're doing. And so our youngest employee is generally around 16 or 17, high school intern through a great partnership we have with a program called the Urban Alliance. Nice. Our oldest employee is 92 years old, this phenomenal man named Charlie Brotman. And when I say he's an employee, he's in the office 2 days a week, working. He's a phenomenal guy. He's a legend in his own right. Look him up. Charlie Brotman announced every presidential inauguration from Eisenhower to Obama's second one. He was the voice of the Washington Senators, came back and did their inaugural season. This guy's a rock star.
Yeah.
And for the last 6-7 years, he's been formally part of our team, and we're so lucky to have him. So we've got this age diversity, which is really important. We're about 50-50 male-female. We're about 68% people of color in the firm. That matters. Like we have in DC, we have a number of people who were born and raised in DC. We try and recruit from all 8 wards. We also have people who were born outside of the country and moved here.
Right.
We have to make sure we're reflecting the communities that we're working in. And it's not easy, and we don't have it all figured out, but there has to be an intentionality. When I say it's not easy to recruit for that in an authentic way. And I'm very comfortable talking about this. Like it's very easy to try and hire for diversity if you just want your website to look diverse. It's much harder to hire for diversity and inclusion in an intentional way where everyone is adding their best self to the table and it's making the firm better. And we spent a lot of time really trying to get that right. And we still got stuff we need to do, but I'm proud that we've got a firm and a culture where we can have those discussions and try and move forward.
Well, when you include people of color in the conversation, it makes it a lot easier to know how to navigate that space instead of, a bunch of white people sitting around talking about diversity and inclusion.
100%.
I don't even, what is actually happening
it's
here.
The same thing with we do a lot of work that are youth focused campaigns. So we're doing a sexual health campaign with the DC Department of Health right now called Sex Is, and it's about sex is many different things to many different people. Let's lean into the discussion and have it from a positive standpoint instead of a fear-based approach, because empirically fear-based campaigns don't work. So let's have a positive campaign that opens up dialogue between youth and trusted adults. It was revolutionary on campaigns like that when we come in and say, why don't we have a youth advisory board of the youth we're serving be the creative directors of the campaign, right? Instead of having a bunch of consultants sit around and think we're getting it right, let's just ask and figure it out that way. So we try and not just hire, but also work into our projects roles, paid roles for the communities we're serving, because they are at the table as active participants, and we are going to be better when they are. Right.
And then, you're planting this beautiful garden for the future because you're going to instill this, fire in these young kids to get involved in their community, and they can realize that they can actually affect some real change, and then they want to get involved, and then that's how we make cities better, right? So what is how does I've been doing a lot of thinking about lifestyle design, right? Like, where do I want to be 5 years from now? Where do I want to be 10 years from now? What do I want my life to look like right now? Like, what do I want to do every day? What do I want to, And so, mine is like eventually in the Caribbean, recreating every recipe on the Great British Baking Show and drinking a lot of wine. I'm just putting that out there. And then also getting, paid to fly around the country, hopefully the world, to talk about democratization of information.
Okay, I like it.
I want to take the experience that I've had in the DC community and being in the music business for 20 years here and being the minority in the room and lending some of that experience to like what happens next and continuing to elevate voices. So that's what I work towards every day. So I'm curious, what is your, what's your thing, man? Where does all this go, right? Because it's a lot of giving into a lot of communities, which obviously is very enriching and empowering and joyful for you. And I love that. And I can relate to that too. But like, where, what's the goal, right? Like, what's the long-term plan? Or are you just sort of in the mix? Do you think about these things?
I think about it all the time. I also try and be as present in the moment as I possibly can, and that's been an evolution for me. I used to get really stressed, as I think many people do, about this work-life balance stuff, and I would think that if I was focusing more on the work or the life, one was negating the other, and I was getting it wrong. So I've adopted, and it's my approach. It doesn't work for everybody, but I am much more comfortable and much happier and much more successful when I blend work and life instead of try and balance them. So for me, I'm going to work hard. I'm going to work lots of hours. I'm going to return email late at night, but I'm also going to take the mornings and spend with my son, who's 17 months old and is my everything, right? So for me, a blend allows that. Now, the challenge, and what we've worked very hard with a lot of intentionality to work into our firm, is how do you do that when you don't own the firm, right? Like, I have all the flexibility in the world. It's my company. How do we also engender that amount of flexibility into the people who are part of our team? And so we spend a lot of time trying to work that out. So long-term plan, I think a lot about that, but never in a way that's trying to also take me away from the present, because I love what I'm doing. I'm the most in my definition of it, I'm the most balanced and the happiest I've ever been. And I'm also working harder than I ever have. And I have more complexity in my life than ever. I have a new kid. Our firm is growing. My wife just changed jobs. We've got a lot going on.
Yeah.
And I love where we're at right now. So I think part of the long-term plan is leaning into what we're growing, making it something that goes beyond a specific project impact to something bigger than that, right? I think the fact that we're trying to prove and are having success in proving a model that allows you to do well and do good sustainably year over year is something I'm really proud of. And if we can scale the impact of that and show that it's not an either or, but it's a both, that's going to get me really, really excited. So my long-term plan is, it used to be, I'm going to be president of the United States. I'm going to make all this difference through politics. And I still think politics is a noble profession. I still think people should go into it. We have a young man on our team who's running for a statewide office in Arizona right now, and I give him all the credit in the world. That is hard to do. And if we're going to be this firm that talks about people getting out there, we got to support it when our team members do. So I'm all in on that. But my long-term vision, I'd really like to be a philanthropist, but you need to make all this money to be a philanthropist. So I want to do the wealth generation part in a great way, building a really good company that's sustainable, and then also start parlaying some of what we're generating into sustainable philanthropic efforts. That would be my dream.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're on the right track to that, and I couldn't agree more. I feel like I'm in the same place.
Yeah.
It's like I've never done so much self-reflection in my life.
Right.
I've never worked as hard as I am, but I feel really balanced. I'm a lot more like feminine energy in my life. I'm working with really exceptional people. I mean, being able to sit and have this conversation right now. I mean, this is all indications that the universe is, aligning in just the right way. And so it's interesting. Same thing with the work-life balance. I'm like, what is this work-life balance people speak of? Like, I like to work, and I have like this one client, she's always telling me, "Mom, I don't work so hard." I'm like, but I like it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't should I feel bad that I'm working too much? I don't know. Shouldn't I just feel bad when I actually feel bad and not feel bad because of like
and you've got to develop the confidence, right, to know what works for you.
Yeah. And like if I have nothing to do on a weekend, like I get a little bored.
Right.
You know what I mean? I go a little crazy and then I end up working anyway. And I'm like, I'm totally okay with that. I really enjoy it because, for me, it's obviously more than just a great British baking show recipes.
It's a great show.
I love that show. It makes me realize how basic my vocabulary is. Whenever I'm like, man, those people are so much smarter than us. But yeah, I mean, it just elevating voices, amplifying voices, getting the right messaging across. Listening is a revolution. Being able to like make money in a way that I'm able to empower other people.
Right.
Make the planet a better place, and also have a life for myself that doesn't involve having to, 10 years from now, I hope I'm not working even harder than I am right now. I hope that, my efforts are smarter and affect more positive change in larger ways without necessarily having to put in 70-hour weeks for another 20 years, right? Because that's not it either.
You got to take care of yourself in the process. And like, I get asked a lot, like how you asked me earlier, like, do you sleep? Yeah, I sleep. I sleep about 6 hours a night. Would I like to sleep more? Yeah, I love to sleep. Sleeping is great. I don't think we should uphold like on this pedestal that people who don't sleep are somewhat magical. Like I don't sleep a lot, but I would love to sleep more. So that would be a great thing to have as we move on. I also think for me, when I get in bed at night and I'm exhausted, as long as I know why I'm exhausted, I'm fine with that level of exhaustion. It's if I can stop kind of pointing to why I'm as tired as I am and that doesn't have meaning, that would be really unsustainable. But if I'm exhausted because I'm working on things I care about and I'm prioritizing the things that are important to me, then that's just part of the territory. Everyone's tired. I have a kid who doesn't sleep at night. Ask any new parent.
Yeah,
Everyone's
exactly.
exhausted.
I was going to say, yeah.
And ask people who have aging parents and are caring for them. Like everyone is tired all the time because people have stuff going on in their life that no one else ever sees. And if we just gave people the benefit that maybe their bad day is caused by something we don't understand, I think we'd all get along a little bit better. But
yeah, well, are you familiar with Brene Brown? Oh, I'll send you some links.
Please.
She's a researcher, and she does a lot of talks about vulnerability and fear, and she talks a lot about she says that just make the assumption about everybody else that they're doing the best they can.
Yeah.
And when no matter how frustrated you might be with them or how they're coming across, and to not personalize it and just to know that everyone's doing the best they can. And I've really just been driving that into my head, and it really changes the way you see things, because it's tough sometimes, right? You get caught up, things are moving really fast.
Right.
It's easy to get frustrated, and it's like, yeah, you don't know what people are dealing with behind closed doors. You don't know how exhausted they are.
Right.
You don't know what's happened with them. And if we could just give each other the benefit of the doubt, it would be a much nicer place to be kicking around.
No, absolutely. So when our little boy was born, I took about a month and a half of paternity leave, and then I took another 3 weeks when my wife went back to work. So all in, I took probably about a little over 2 months of paternity leave, and was home, and I was focused on my kid. And it was the least connected I'd been to my business. Now, least connected to me still meant I was checking email every day. And it still meant I was dialed in, but it meant that I wasn't making every decision. I wasn't approving every deliverable. We'd empowered a team of people and the team as a whole to do that. And, magically, I started to achieve a little bit more balance, and the business started to achieve a level of sustainability that it didn't have when I was there every single day. In my mind, making everything work and probably just micromanaging more than I needed to, right? And so when I came back, I said, assume I work 80 hours a week, just for round numbers. I'm willing to do that again, but I want to do 40 hours of what I did before, and I want to do 40 hours of something that really helps us expand our impact and grow and build, right? But for me, it literally took stepping back to find that realization and to reset some of the priorities for that next level of growth. And I think we have to do that, right? Totally. I get asked a lot, like, how'd you figure it all out? I'm like, I figure it out every day. And when I'm wrong, I tell my team I'm wrong, and we move forward and we learn from that together. And I think we have to have a little bit of that vulnerability to allow space for learning and growing.
The rumble, for sure. I mean, I have a client, Monique Maley, and she says it's hard to read the label from inside the jar. And it's just such an accurate thing. You really do need that like third party perspective on your life sometimes, or your job, to realize like, hey, maybe I could do this a little different. I feel like I quote this too much, but there's a book called The One-Page Marketing Plan by Alan Dibb. And he says that if you can't leave your business for 6 months and come back and have a similar business, that you don't have a business, you have a job or an expensive hobby. And that was kind of triggering. I was like, Jesus Christ, man, 6 months, that's a really long time. But you know what? He's right. Like the business has to be able to sustain itself. You have to like entrust that you've developed those leadership skills and decision-making abilities, and that everybody on the team understands the core vision and the mission. So how could they possibly stray? Because everyone is a part of the guardrail, and everyone is part of the machine. And then you just watch it flourish. And that's a really, exciting feeling and a really great, realization, internally, just to be like, hey, maybe I was micromanaging a little bit, you know? But that's the great part about being an adult, right? And being in tune to some of these things. You're able to even to recognize that and then move forward accordingly.
Right. And it's interesting because I spend a lot of my day working on client stuff, but I also spend a lot of my day working on the business as a whole. And then I spend an even larger lot of my day working with the people on my team. And I think it's that last part that is often the most challenging when you're growing a business, but it's also the part that is personally most rewarding to me, is trying to kind of cultivate people and to be cultivated by people, and to mentor and be mentored. And sometimes it's deeply frustrating and people let you down all the time, but more than often they don't. And so you have to invest as if they won't, and they won't. And if they do, you don't take that personally and you move on. And it's easy to say that, but over the course of my career, both with a decade at a university and then working for a firm and then starting my own firm, we have a really robust associate internship program where we pay our interns based on my experience of not being paid as an intern. It was really important that we offer paid professional internships. So there have probably been hundreds of people now that have come through some sort of mentoring internship track in the various companies I started or businesses I worked in, et cetera. And if you look back over that, that is going to have a much bigger impact than any specific project, right? So I've really leaned into that, but we've really leaned into that as a firm, to the point that on our mid-year and annual reviews, one of the questions for every member of the team is, how have you mentored and how have you been mentored? So it's one thing to talk about, it's another thing to actually make it part of what you're kind of graded on at work. And so we've tried to create that culture to hopefully allow it to be cyclical. That's
really awesome. I mean, I got to say, like, reading these leadership books and listening to Brene Brown and talking about vulnerability and like how to rumble, And it just it's hard. It's hard to listen to because I realize how bad I've gotten it in the past. I mean, I've even texted a couple old employees and been like, "Hey, man, I am really sorry." You
Yep.
know, like I didn't even realize how, like, you know. And they're like, "Molly, I love you. Like you're the best boss I ever had."
I've
And
texted
like
some old bosses and been like, listen, back when you were trying to give me this feedback and I was like this punk kid who knew everything,
Yeah.
I got that wrong.
Yeah.
And I just had the same discussion you were trying to have with me with someone on my team. And I understand how frustrating it is not to be heard. And it was an actual email I sent to someone. She wrote back, she's like, in my history of managing people, do you know how rare it is to actually get this email? And I'm like, again, I was wrong. And thank you for what you taught us. So we've got to have that ability to learn and grow.
It's so important. You know, it's so important. It just makes us better people.
Yeah.
It opens us up to other better people.
Right.
And you just start like operating on a different plane. You know, it's a really beautiful thing, man. Well, you know, I've had such a, you know, great time chatting with you. I really have. Like, you're such a, you know, you're such an important and special person, you know, and I, you know, met you very briefly, but through amazing people. And so I was like, I just, you know, your whole energy, I was like, oh, this guy is about business and stuff, but just really, you know, a hardworking, fast mover. And I love that. But then just really getting to know you and doing some research on you, like, I'm really, really impressed. And like, honestly, DC is so lucky to have you. With the, you know, the displacement and everything that's going on. It's just so important. And so thank you for putting so much time and effort into DC. And I will definitely be thinking about things. I love the like are you mentoring? Are you know, I have I did another podcast interview with a guy named Maurice Philogene, and he has this hands up, hands down approach.
Okay.
And he's like, sometimes you have your hand up, you know, and you got to ask for help, and that's hard. But sometimes you got to put your hand down and you got to offer that help.
Yep.
And I really, really love that. And I think it's, you know, pretty relative here, right?
We're all learning.
We're all learning every day, you
Right.
know, even to the course of a podcast
Right.
interview, right? So, well, I really thank you for your time to come spend it and, you know, hang out with me here. And I can't wait to share this interview with other people and just to learn more and see how, you know, Heartcast Media can kind of help. I was, you know, just thinking about when you're talking about these community meetings and things and how maybe some of our communication procedures and stuff could maybe help benefit
100%.
the community a little bit more, because that's the stuff that I really care about as well. It's really important to me, but I don't always know how to be helpful. It's always been through music and art and culture and community, but not on kind of the other side of things. It's always been a little underground. And so I would love to be a part of helping to amplify those voices in the communities that I really care about, because I don't really know how to help a lot of people in this town right now.
There's huge opportunity there, and good people have to support good people, and there are good people doing good work all over this city and in many cities. And we also work in really rural areas. There are good people doing good work everywhere. We need to elevate them.
And more of that information needs to get out. Like, you know, the bad news travels fast and it's relentless, and it's just it just doesn't stop. And but the good news outweighs the bad news, you know. In ways that aren't even measurable, but we're not getting that, you know, and it can be confusing sometimes, because you're like, the media is telling me everything's a mess, but then as you move through life, you have all these enriching, amazing experiences, and you're like, how is it so bad? But it doesn't seem that bad, you know. But then you see suffering. It's just such a hard, confusing time to be alive.
So much access to all of it at all times, and in many ways, we're more disconnected than we've ever been.
100%.
So how do we lean into those moments to have actual discussions? And I know we're wrapping up here, but I think a huge part of that is the storytelling and the listening, right? So I'm on panels where people say the version of, well, tell me how you got here, and then I can tell you a really great 30-second version of how I got here, but it leaves out all the messy parts, which are actually going to be most instructive. So when we're telling our stories, we have to also tell the messy parts, because that inspires other people. And then we have to leave room for people to tell stories. I mentioned it earlier, but we've done a bunch of work around police community relations. We've done a bunch of work around gun violence and others. And if you start a discussion with what is your position on this, the discussion either ends or has to be about defending that position. If you simply say, tell me the first time you were arrested or pulled over by the police, and I'll tell you my first experience. Now we're telling a story, and hopefully in that story, we're learning something about each other that informs where our positions come from. And once we've done that, we've personalized it in a way that should allow for dialogue. Now, this isn't a hold hands, kumbaya, everything's going to be okay, but it means we now have a point of reference for where our positions come from, as opposed to defining positions and defending them. So the more we can talk, the more we can have stories, the more we can listen. To your point, these things, they are solvable, but it's going to take lots of concerted work and discussion and dialogue and listening. And that's why I think the platform you have is so important.
Well, thank you. I think it's exciting, and I mean, isn't that the very basis of humanity is storytelling?
Right.
You know what I mean? It's
Absolutely.
you know, it's the very core of it all. So thank you again. I really appreciate you taking time. I know how incredibly busy you are. So thank you very much. I
been
really
fun.
enjoyed this conversation, and I'm looking forward to figuring out how I can help make the world a better place, by your side.
We'll do it together. It'll be good.
Yeah,
Thank
man.
you.
Thank
Have a
you.
great day.